everyone, today I'm going to take you through a really cool coaching exercise that you can use for anything, any people that you want to have in your life, whether it's what you expect from a friend, a new relationship, maybe even a job if you're job hunting. This is a really, really good exercise, and it's called, I'm borrowing this from a former coach of mine, and it's called the 5-star person exercise. So you can replace person with 5-star client if you run a business and you're thinking about your clients and your business, what you expect from them, how you expect them to behave. You might be thinking about a 5-star partner or partners if you have more than one. You might be thinking about a boss or a company that you might want to be working for. It's anyone that you're going to have any kind of relationship with, professional or personal. This is a really, really useful thing to help you get clear. And the reason that folks particularly, I mean, this is a good exercise for everyone, but obviously I founded the Centre for Childhood Trauma Healing, and I think that for those of us who've survived complex trauma and are on our healing journey through complex trauma, it's a really useful tool when we're coming from a place where a lot of this stuff is not intuitive to us. We have to go through a bit of a phase where we really quantify this stuff and we're able to have enough information that we can analyze, and this is a conscious process. The idea is that once you've done this enough and you have enough relationships, working, personal or whatever, you have enough experience with the positive or enough lived experience with all of these different areas, it will become far more second nature, like driving a car, where after a while you don't even think about it anymore. But whilst you're in a stage where you're beginning to intentionally live a new life, you're intentionally trying to live a different way, to break old patterns, to not go after the people who historically you might have gone after or worked for or been friends with. You're trying to break a pattern, you're trying to break out of what you know. And I think that a lot of that starts with very consciously making decisions and almost kind of pulling all of those wishes, those wants and those desires out of you onto paper. So this is or if you want to make notes or do it that way, but this is an exercise where we're going to bring all of that, all of those thoughts, all of those desires onto a piece of paper or whatever, so that you can see what it is that you're thinking. You can kind of help yourself to build a picture of what it is that you're aiming for when you create relationships with other human beings in any context. So I've recorded a little whiteboard video on Zoom so I can show you an example. I've never done this before, so I was very excited to see that I could do this. So I want you to take your piece of paper or your notes or whatever. You're going to call it 5-star person profile. You can change person for whatever role. And then I want you to create a table that has 2 columns in it. This is a really rough drawing. For those of you who have things like perfectionism, and I have a little bit of that, I'm really sorry for my table. It's not super neat. I tried to make sure that the lines were straight, but they're all different sizes. So please don't hate me. Okay, at the top of your first column, you're going to put them. So you can put here partner, boss, company, friend, whatever it is, whoever it is that you're creating this 5-star profile for. And now in the them column, I want you to start to think about traits that you are kind of expecting, that are really important to you in this other person. So as examples here, and these are absolutely examples because all of the traits I've put here are not true of me, not all of them. So for you, it might be really important that people are on time. If you're the sort of person who can't cope with the unexpected, or you find that very difficult, it may be that actually you're going to prefer someone who's on time. I value on timeness, but I have something called time agnosia, which a lot of neurodivergent people have, which is also another term for it is time blindness. I have no idea how long anything takes, and I try my best, but I'm very bad at timekeeping. So if for somebody it was absolutely essential that someone was on time, I would not be a good match for them. I try my best. I'm often on time, or if I'm late, it's only by a few minutes nowadays. But some days, if I'm having a particularly tough day, it may be that people will have to be patient with me for a bit longer. So if you're not an on-time person, your version of that may be somebody who is flexible. Yeah, that's definitely what I'm looking for in people that I spend time with. Because if I can't be on time, I drive people mad. And I have friends who prefer people to be on time, and they love me a lot. That's all I'm going to say. It might mean a lot to you to have someone who pays their bills promptly. This might be true if you're a business owner and you want your clients to pay you on time. It might be a really important thing for you that people are financially reliable. For some folks, you might have dated people in the past or have relationships or roommates or people in the past who did not pay the bills on time repeatedly, and that was very stressful for you, and that's not a stress you're willing to have. So that can be another one. I think most people, empathy and kindness are one of the real cornerstones of most relationships, and they're often not included on these types of lists. Kindness, in fact, I've not even written it in this list, and I know from things that I've learned and coaching and studying that kindness is actually, it's one of the most important traits you can ask for in almost any relationship that you ever have with another human being. And a level of somebody's kindness is often a huge predictor of how successful a relationship of any kind will be. So that's a really big one, especially personal relationships. You might be looking for someone who takes personal responsibility and takes that really seriously, takes accountability of themselves, that kind of thing. That's an absolute essential for me. I can't have any kind of relationship with somebody who does not take personal responsibility and accountability. Someone who can apologise when they've made a mistake. Obviously, that's a very hard thing to do, and sometimes our egos can take a knock. But in order for relationships to thrive, to sustain, and to continue, that is absolutely essential. So obviously, these are examples that I've put down. And these might just be basic things that for you you already know this very well. So you don't have to write down every single thing that you ever think of, but I would encourage you to make an exhaustive list and just see what comes out of that. For me, it's really important that somebody that I have a close personal relationship with can hold space for me without fixing, without needing to fix, without going straight to a solution. Because of my own work on myself, but also because of healthy boundaries and things like that. Typically, I don't want people to fix things for me. Occasionally I might want to troubleshoot with somebody and to come up with solutions, but generally I don't want people to do that. And that's really important. If I try to have a close personal relationship with somebody who doesn't know how to hold space without going straight for a fix or even knowing that they're doing that, I find that very hard to maintain long term, because it actually gets in the way of emotional intimacy. It does not aid emotional intimacy. So that's a really big one. There's a book that I recommended, an audio book, on my essential reading list for childhood trauma survivors. And it was the seminar delivered by Brené Brown, all about the power of vulnerability. One of the best audiobooks I've ever listened to in my life. I would still say that all these years later. I've listened to it so many times. And she talks a lot about that kind of thing. So if that feels like an area that you might need to work on, I would encourage you to go and get that audiobook, and even go and get the list. Go and check it out. Other examples I've put is have done their own inner work. I think by the time you started to work on yourself, maybe you've been into therapy, maybe you've worked with coaches like me, maybe you've done a lot of self-development. By the time you've become very self-aware, albeit imperfect, but by the time everyone is, by the time you've become that self-aware, it can often be a hindrance to try to create a close personal relationship with someone who doesn't have good self-awareness and is not anywhere near where you are at the moment, or that you haven't got enough in common in that area. But again, like some people, there's no right or wrong answers. I'm just giving some really I guess broad strokes, very general ones that you might want to think about. And the next one I've written is committed to personal growth. So again, that's a really, really important one. We're always changing, growing and learning anyway as human beings, but I think some people are not aware of that, and if they are aware of that, they might not like it, might not have embraced it yet. That can be a bit of a hindrance in my experience. Now, in the second column at the top, I want you to write you. This is a tricky part. It is not an easy part. But in a way, it's the most important part, and I'll tell you why. In relationships, often you get people who have a lot of very complementary traits. People who, you often get in a friendship or within partnerships or anything, you'll get people who, it's quite common for you to have a certain trait that the other person doesn't have, and together you make a good team because of that. And that's really normal, and that's totally okay. But overall, the overall sense of you and of them, if you're coming from very different spaces, that can be a very difficult place to maintain. And this is not in any way an invitation to berate yourself or to judge yourself. This is purely an exercise in looking at where you want your relationships to be and what your part is in becoming your sort of 50% element of that relationship. So what I mean is that, as an example, if you want somebody who has really good boundaries, and at the moment you find boundaries very hard to lay down, very hard to communicate, and very hard to honour and sort of carry through with consequences of boundary violations and stuff. Obviously, if you've got somebody who's emotionally healthy, they shouldn't be violating boundaries very often, but it may be that you might even just need to communicate, be very clear about them in the beginning, be very clear about expectations, and be very clear about the actions you have to take in order to look after yourself and your needs if those boundaries are not met. So if you want someone who's very good at boundaries, it may be that you need a little bit of help on your own boundaries and getting good at those. It might not take very long if you're committed to that kind of change. Again, working with someone like me, or even just doing lots of self-development, you can come up with something that will help you to get good at this sort of thing fairly quickly. And at the same time, I would temper that by saying that if you have some unresolved trauma that you have not done any trauma processing on, which is not the same as talking it through. I've done other videos on this talking about how trauma processing is not the same as a talking therapy, and why that's important and what it is. So go back and check out some of those videos talking about that if you don't know what I mean. But what I want to say is, if you're still operating from a place of trauma, it may be very scary to put down a boundary, and it may be that your trauma response is so strong that at this point in time it's going to be very difficult for you to do that at all without help around your trauma. If you have grown up in a difficult environment, or you've been in a relationship in the past, maybe for a long time, with someone who it was not safe to be completely honest with. You had to watch what you said all the time. It may be that those trauma mechanisms are really keeping you safe still by keeping your mouth shut, really firmly shut. And obviously, if you're wanting to have a healthy relationship with people and that mechanism is still very strong in you, it might make having a healthy relationship quite challenging, even if the other people are with you are very patient and they get it and everything else. It just makes it harder. So if at some point you feel that that is the case for you, don't blame yourself. Like, it's a trauma mechanisms are there to keep you safe, and if they're that effective, then they're probably actually doing a really good job. So it's nothing to be ashamed about, nothing to be self-critical about. But if you want to get out of that, you probably will need help from someone like me, or if not like me, someone who does some kind of trauma processing that will help your brain and your body to finish with that and understand that it's now safe to move forwards. So in this column where you look at you and you look at, do I match up with this? That's because ultimately, in order to more easily attract people who have the qualities that you want and that you feel are right for you, you need to make sure that you're kind of going to be able to meet them there. There have been times in the past where people have been so early on in their sort of self-awareness, their healing and everything else, as an example, that had their perfect partner for them turned up at that exact moment, they wouldn't have been able to even have a conversation with them. They would, their energy, their alignment, their life experience would have been so incompatible at that point that it couldn't have happened. It couldn't have happened. So this exercise and this second part of the exercise and looking at you and where you are, it gives you a good idea of practical things that you can do. So for example, you know, like the example earlier with boundaries, if that's still area that you need to work on, maybe if you're looking for somebody who is really committed to their personal growth, maybe so far for you it's been something you've done sporadically, but there's still a part of you that's avoiding. So again, this is not an exercise for self-criticism. This is purely to get a good picture of where you are and where you want to be in order to be that compatible part of that relationship, that or friendship or whatever that it is that you want. All of that to say that you want to check that the level of emotional health that you want from somebody else, you're able to meet them, at least for the most part. And obviously none of this is with the idea that eventually you'll all be perfect. It's not about that. It's about how you manage and how you live and how you relate day to day, typically. Obviously, when we're all in stressful situations, a lot of this can go out the window for most people, and there's nothing wrong with that. But we're talking about how you operate day to day, and if generally speaking, where you are in terms of this sort of ideal relationship and how you're going to do your part. And this is where the magic stuff happens, because generally speaking, if you're doing your part well and you're practicing it and you're committed to all of those different things, that's typically when you find people who recognize the same things in you that you do in them. And just to, you don't have to match. You don't have to match. If you've asked for somebody as an example who is maybe really outgoing, maybe it's because you're not very outgoing and you want to go out more, you want to be challenged, you want someone who's going to pull you out of the house once or twice a week. And they also might be looking for somebody who might keep them home once or twice a week when normally they would go out, you know, or maybe they're looking for someone to do calmer things with, because typically they've been maybe a bit more hyper and they have liked going out too much, or I don't know, just as an example. But maybe they want to meet someone who creates a really nice home because they love their home, they love spending time at home. So it's not to say you have to be exactly the same as the other person, but being clear about what it is that you bring that's complementary is also totally okay. It may be that because, like me, your timekeeping is sometimes not great, that you want the other person to be really good at it, so that actually over time you might learn a bit more about timekeeping from them, and you might have that modeled to you, and you might take on some of those traits. And equally, that person might want to relax a little bit more about that sort of thing. So it's totally okay for you to pick someone and pick traits that you don't have at all, providing you're clear about your complementary trait is good for other reasons. And not to say, there may be aspects of you that you really genuinely find difficult and you can't put a positive spin on it, in which case that's totally okay. And if it doesn't feel like it fits into this exercise, then you don't have to do it. But I think it can just be really useful to even be aware of those things that you might feel a bit ashamed about or a bit embarrassed about, or they might be sort of aspects that you're not super keen on actually somebody else seeing. And I think those are really important things to know about yourself, because whilst you have hang-ups around that, it may get in the way of the type of relationship that you want. And again, it might be really, really useful to work through that with a coach or, someone else, so that you can get to a point where you say, well, I'm not amazing at these things, and actually that's totally okay. You might be able to get to a point where you genuinely think about the things that you can't do or that you're not good at, and realize that actually in your way of life, having to operate a certain way, actually there are going to be aspects of that that people really do like. And I think as well, if you have a disability, if you have a neurodivergence, if there are aspects of you that do not typically get featured in television ads about how fun people can be, it can be difficult to feel positive about certain aspects of yourself. But it's definitely not something to, I think that's something to really tackle actually head on. And there might be a bit of grieving involved there, and definitely a lot of big self-acceptance if you still find that stuff quite hard. And again, no judgment, but it's really useful. It may be that there are many areas here that actually you're good at and you feel very positive about, but any time that there's a certain thing that pops up, could be mental health, could be disability, if you have a disability that's different on different days. I think it can be really useful and take some of the stress out if you've got to a point where you have a certain strategy around those difficult days, or you're able to at least communicate to somebody, some days I'm going to be top of the world, feeling like I really want to connect, and there are going to be other days when I just can't do that, and there's no positive spin on it, I just can't. And getting to the point where you've accepted that enough that you can then say it to someone else without getting teary-eyed, you feel confident to communicate, that is also really, really important. And then at the end there, I've just put examples of other things that you can think about. So examples, how they live their life. Are they tidy, punctuality, routine, free-flowing? How they treat others, that's a really big one. Their goals and ambitions. It might be that for you want a really simple life. You dream of a hut in the woods somewhere and enough money to live on, or maybe even off-grid, like some people are really into that, and I get the appeal. For other people, for example, I've done business and been in the entrepreneurial space for over 11 years at this point, on and off, and that is massively a part of my character. So I don't necessarily expect to be friends with or date people who are also entrepreneurs, but I don't tend to get on as well or have enough in common with folks who just have a job to pay the bills and they're not really passionate about what they're doing, or they don't think further ahead, or they're not into kind of professional advancement and stuff like that. So it's not to say that, you know, the person I look for has to be just like me. It's more thinking about things that you talk a lot about. If I you know, as an example, some of my friends are not business owners, never have been, and don't have any desire to be. However, they have a lot of interest in relationships and mental health and things like that. So even if they're not going to be exactly like you, I think having enough of a shared vocabulary and experience, point of view and interests is really, really important. So goals and ambitions, I guess interests comes into that as well. The next thing is their general or baseline vibe or mood. So are they upbeat? Are they relaxed? Are they adventurous? You know, how do you want to exist most of the time? My general vibe is sloth. I'm very chilled out. I'm very ambitious and I do a lot of things, but I do a lot of that stuff thinking or lying down or sitting. I'm not in person. I'm not someone who... I've got friends who are literally addicted to exercise. They'll do 2 or 3 different types of exercise a day. They're always up and down. They can't sit still for very long, whereas I'm a very, very slow-paced person, physically speaking. And I do a lot of thinking. I do a lot of creating. So this armchair that you see me in now, I spend a huge amount of my time in this armchair and I'm very happy here. So if I were to go out with somebody who wanted to be out of the house all the time, going out walking, climbing mountains, all of that sort of thing, we would drive each other mad because I have no interest in that, and they would be very bored because I would never go with them. So unless they had a load of friends that they did this with regularly and were happy to leave me at home and for me to not be involved, we would not gel very well together because we would have very different ideas of what our sort of day-to-day mood was. I tend to do better with people who are happy going out, happy staying in, very, very middle of the road. I do like leaving the house most days, but occasionally even just a trip to the supermarket is enough for me, just to get the ants out of my pants, as we say. But otherwise, you know, I might be happy staying in most of the day. For other people, that would drive them absolutely mad. So, you know, it's important to think about things like that. And the last 2 things is general values. So how inclusive is this person? Is it important to you that they have like similar political stance? You know, for somebody like me whose identity intersects so many different scales, me and someone who's very right wing would not get along. I swiped left on somebody only yesterday on my dating app that I'm using at the moment, and we were not aligned. So thinking about things like that, it might be that, you know, you might be very eco-friendly, eco-minded, you know, sort of global warming and climate change might be very close to your heart. It may be that you couldn't date somebody who gets a new plastic bag every single time they go to the supermarket. So, you know, I think politics covers other things like this. If you're thinking about finding a partner and you want to have a family, it may be important to you to think about how children are raised. A lot of the trend at the moment around parenting is around gentle parenting, treating children with respect, all of those really radical things. And people who are really into the very traditional ways of raising children, that may be an area that needs to be discussed, because obviously those two areas can be in conflict at times. If you're looking at work environments, how do they treat their staff in a crisis? What are their parental leave, inclusivity, bereavement policies, etc.? So it's really looking at the values of what everyone believes is right. You know, what do we believe is fair? How do we feel that other people should be treated, especially if they're people in our care, or, you know, each other, how we expect each other to be treated. And then lastly, smaller details, like if one of you's a night owl or one of you's a morning lark. One of you might be a minimalist and want their house to look very kind of smooth, very minimal, not you know, not too many bright colours and stuff, and for it to all look very just so. Other people might be a maximalist and love lots of colours, lots of print, lots of self-expression. And all of these smaller details, I promise you, if you met someone, or you got a job, or you made a friend, you know, you found a partner who was, you know, absolutely felt like such a good fit, you had a great time, you were on board about all the really important things, these smaller details, they won't be deal breakers. And actually maybe it would be a good idea to look at this list and think that actually some of these, whilst they might not be ideal or might be a bit annoying, some of these things are not necessarily massive deal breakers. And it's important to have some flexibility. Because what I find is that this is a really useful exercise to do, but if you stick to it to the letter, you will deprive yourself of a lot of good things. And that's not to say that you need to be flexible on all of those. Absolutely not. There are going to be certain things that are total non-negotiables. And I think it would be a good idea to look at which of the traits that you've listed are non-negotiables and stick to those. An example for me is that as a non-binary person, I'm very much assumed queer by almost everybody that I meet. And so if I were to go out with somebody who, in order for them to feel comfortable, they needed to be seen with somebody who would help them to pass the relationship off as a straight relationship, that's a non-negotiable for me. Particularly as I'm transitioning, I'm starting to grow a beard, well, on one side anyway. My voice is starting to change, you know, it's just not compatible. It's not compatible for me to do that. You know, equally, if you're a very spiritual person and so much of how you think about the world and how you know, your experience, how you deal with tough things and stuff, if a lot of that is to do with your spirituality, your spiritual practice, even your religion, to be in a close personal relationship, particularly romantic one, with someone who is adamant that all of that stuff is bad and wrong or rubbish and can't even hold space for you two to be different, then that might be a real deal breaker, and I think probably a really sensible one as well. So I hope that this exercise has been helpful. I would invite you to revisit this maybe once a week for about a month, purely to check in with things. You might come back and actually in a few weeks' time you come back to a trait and you go, I've actually realised I don't care about that. One of the things I used to not care about was tidiness, but now that I have turned into a fairly tidy and clean person, and the older I get, the more tidy and the more clean I become, it's not at sort of you know, a disordered level, but it is I do need my space to be that certain way, and the older I get, the less flexible I feel around that. So I think if I were to even consider living with somebody who was typically very messy, I would find that genuinely very hard, and especially for my mental health. So things do change over time. There may be aspects that you talk about now that in 10 years time you couldn't care less about. There may be things that you don't think about now, but by the time you're in a relationship, you're suddenly reminded of a certain thing, or you've never experienced it before, and you go, huh, not sure I can cope with this. It might mean having a difficult conversation, or worse. So not that it's worse, everyone will survive, everyone's an adult. But yeah, have a look at your non-negotiables. Have a look at all the things that you expect from, a new relationship, a new person, or a job, or anything like that. And just have a check-in with yourself about, are you able to be that cooperative component of this dynamic? What areas need work, or actually you're pretty confident you can deliver your end of the bargain, generally speaking. All right. I've been Harris at the Centre for Childhood Trauma Healing. I hope this has been helpful. If you're watching this on my YouTube, make sure to subscribe. I release new videos every week. And if you are reading this, if you're looking at this on my blog, you can go over to my YouTube channel, or you can even sign up for my mailing list, where you'll get a recap of some of what I do, although not every single thing. If you're a techie person, you can subscribe to my RSS feed. Even I don't know how to do that, but people have told me that they have. So if you're a techie person, go and do that. And I will see you in the next video.